Hi, I'm Chelsea Hollow, founder of Concert Rebels, and I'm here presenting you with a short video series of discussions with me and some of the wonderful composers that I've had the privilege of working with lately. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, desperate to connect with artists once again, I created a call for proposals with one main criterion: to create an art song or song cycle based on an activist text or theme. In this conversation, I talk with Jason Cady about his song, I Could Not Allow That to Stand, which sets the text of a speech given by his very own representative, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We chat about how he defines opera, what it's like to work with activists and non-poetic texts, and the many different musical genres and literary movements which inspire his music. I had the privilege of speaking on a panel discussion on arts and activism organized by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, during which I presented a virtual premiere for the song, which you'll see clips of later in the video. So Jason, welcome. I'm going to read a little bit of your bio. I hope I don't embarrass you. Jason Cady is a composer and librettist who performs on pedal steel guitar and modular synthesizer. Anthony Tomasini of the New York Times described his video opera, I Screwed Up the Future, as a charming fantasy. And Opera News described his opera, I Need Space, as delightfully weird, hilarious, dry, and endearingly poignant. Cady founded Experiments in Opera, where he now serves as co-artistic director with Kamla Sankaram, and Experiments in Opera has presented the music of over 50 composers. He was born in Flint, Michigan, and now lives in New York City and is an enrolled member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. Wow, Jason, that's quite a bio. Welcome to my first ever video interview.
Well, thanks for having me.
I'm curious, it seems like most of the repertoire I've seen that you've created is extremely innovative, and you're always updating the definition of opera and classical music. And as someone who is often trying to push those boundaries myself in my own craft, I'm just curious, for you, how do you define what is an opera and what is classical music?
I'm gonna answer the first part of it. You said opera and you said classical. I'm just gonna answer the opera part of it because my answer to that will already be long enough. So I would say that whatever the definition is, it is a handful of several characteristics. So what all those characteristics are, I don't necessarily need to lay them out, but you know, a large scale work with a certain type of singing and theater and staging and the particular forms of like recitative and aria and all that. And one could go on with many more characteristics. And any one piece, if it's going to be called an opera, it's going to have more of those, but not necessarily all of them. And so that's my first definition to it. And the second one, it is a particular historical lineage, and so anyone producing work that's coming out of that lineage is part of opera. So, you know, to give an example, I mean, I don't really know the repertoire of musical theater all that well. You know, I've seen a number of musicals, but like if someone is a musical theater composer, they're going to know Rodgers and Hammerstein really well.
Right.
And I, for example, do not. But I know the work of, like, say, Robert Ashley really well, and Philip Glass, but also Monteverdi and Mozart and others. So if someone wants to define opera very narrowly as being Puccini and Verdi, I think that's a little bit too narrow of a definition. I'm more for an expansive definition.
Yeah, I like thinking about it in those terms of the lineage of which your training comes from. The song we worked on together, I Could Not Allow That to Stand, which I'll introduce in a second, but it felt, you know, while the accompaniment to it, or the electronics tracks could easily be turned into a pop song. I think you're right in that lineage. You see how it was designed and the choices you made that are in your lineage of training. Add to it a classical soprano and piano, and it's definitely classical sounding.
These were the words that Representative Yoho levied against a congresswoman. The congresswoman that not only represents New York's 14th congressional district.
Your song, I Could Not Allow That to Stand, uses the text of your congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in her response to Representative Yoho's harassment on the steps of the Capitol. I'm curious what interested you in this project, and have you ever worked with activist or political texts before?
Yeah, I did a sound installation in 2008 that's called Chorus of Refuge, and it was a collaboration with my wife, Ann Hepperman, and her radio partner at the time, Kara Oler. And it was based on interviews from refugees from 5 different cities and refugee populations in the U.S.
My name is
I'm from Somalia.
I'm from Afghanistan.
I belong I'm Afghanistan.
My parents were Burundi in 1972.
Started
From there, they went to Rwanda and Afghanistan.
To some extent, I didn't necessarily think of it as political, but considering the climate in this country, it unfortunately is kind of political. But I guess in kind of a somewhat soft way, in terms of here are these stories, listen to them. And I can't imagine anyone listening to that piece and listening to those stories and not coming away feeling more compassionate, like if they were, not already feeling compassionate to begin with.
Yeah, I love that. I think for me, I call myself an operatic activist, and it, for me, happens in like 2 different ways. I love personally activism and doing what I can to participate in making our society like be more aware of things that are going on, and being more connected just to the more immediate issues in our society. But I also feel that these activist texts are so relevant, and they are telling the stories of people who are alive today, struggles that are happening right now. And they're so compelling that I feel like it's a sort of activism that brings in new audiences. Most classical song texts are sourced from poetry. And do you approach these texts that are, sourced from either the stories of refugees or this speech? I'm curious how you approach classical music composition in general when it comes to text.
I pretty much always start with the text, and usually I write the words myself. There's many nice things about that. I mean, not having to secure rights, having texts that are musical to begin with, being able to make adjustments to the text while composing. Getting into AOC, I mean, there were many wonderful speeches that she has done. This was one that I guess had like a particular feeling of drama to it.
My father thinks of you. He's not alive to see how it's just you to be his daughter. My mother got to see you stay. Your love just takes to love.
Yeah, I think also just having sung the text, it was delivered almost poetically, and the repetition and the rhythm, the flow of it feels almost musical.
Yeah, well, I tried to bring that out.
You definitely did, yeah.
There's a certain amount of editing to the text, mostly because it's a 10-minute speech, and setting that to music would have turned it into like a 25 or 30-minute piece.
Right.
And we didn't want that. When you're editing for content, there's also thinking of like, oh, well, where is she using repetition as a rhetorical device? As a composer, I'm going to respond to that artistically also.
And I could not let
places where I think I was able to like kind of bring out some rhymes that maybe if you just listen to the speech wouldn't necessarily be present. I love poetic devices. I love rhyming. I think people just naturally find that delightful. Some people find that too traditional and they want to avoid it, but I'm not afraid of fun. I mean, could you imagine if a rapper came out and didn't rhyme?
No.
I mean, maybe that would be kind of cool because it would be something different, but the whole point is to rhyme and use poetic devices.
Well, and it's so genius in the way it's done when it's done well. I mean, I love listening to how MCs and rappers will like really get into a flow where there's these internal rhymes and I mean, just layers upon layers of intricate word discovery and word play. And, you know, that's just, my brain loves the way words can play together. And I think both opera and rap take advantage of that often.
Rap is like arguably the most popular music in the world.
Well, and also look how relevant it is, right? I mean, you think about, I think, you know, not to just, I feel like often classical musicians, when we talk about rap, are like quick to jump into Hamilton. So I'm just gonna put up a disclaimer that I'm sorry that I'm about to do that. But I think talk about something that is taking a story that is old and forgotten and modernizing it, updating it. And Hamilton absolutely does that. And the genius of using rap to do that makes it feel relevant.
Yeah.
That makes sense that it's so popular. And I love it. It's cathartic. This is, it's very connected to why I choose activist texts for my own performances. Cool. Do you want to talk at all about the music of the song?
Sure. The basic overall structure, just to get slightly technical for a moment, it's in F Lydian and then it modulates upwards in major thirds. So it goes F Lydian, then A Lydian, then D flat Lydian, and then that leads it back to F Lydian. So that's the overall structure.
Did you come up with that concept before like creating the melody, or was that something that the melody kind of drove you towards?
Yeah, I created the structure first. It's not that every detail is pre-planned,
right,
but I don't believe in always relying on intuition and spontaneity. I think that sets us up with the danger of doing something derivative, because if we're only relying on what we hear, then there's an interaction with all the music that we've heard and loved. And I mean, that's fine, but I was always attracted to, there was a literary movement known as the Oulipo that was sort of an anti-surrealist group. So surrealism is all about creating art from the unconscious. And so the Oulipo was about creating art from the conscious mind. And what that meant for them is creating restrictions. So like there was one member of the group that wrote a novel which has been translated as A Void, and it doesn't contain the letter E in any of it. So
to the whole book.
Right, yeah, and it's like a 300-page, roughly a 300-page novel. You know, he restricts his vocabulary to words that don't happen to have the word E in it. So that's the kind of thing that they would do, and that's more of an unusual thing to do in literature than it is in music. One has to have a balance. I mean, also I'm very much influenced by improvisation and jazz, but generally don't start writing without some kind of plan.
Cool. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really wonderful to get to know the works better and to get to know the composers better. For anyone watching this, if you're curious about more information about the concert, whether it's already happened or if it's coming in the future, you can find out more in the description below. As of now, the concert Cycles of Resistance is planned for January 28th in San Francisco, and it will be live streamed. So come check us out and hear Jason Cady's I Could Not Allow That to Stand. Bye!
Bye, Chelsea. Thank you.
Thank you.